One of the most important things for a man is to not do life in isolation. It's critical to have other men who will have your back, men you can do life together with. From celebrating the high points to supporting you during the low points, this life was not meant to be lived alone. My guest today is Theo Zhuang. Times were tough for him as a child, growing up in Venezuela as a young boy from the ages of 3 to 10, as his parents were missionaries around the world. That was a difficult environment for everyone, but especially a young boy. And growing up as a pastor's kid, it didn't help him during those years, but began his discovery of his own identity, life purpose, and calling. God brought him through various life experiences, from volunteering to disaster relief, and in each he had an opportunity to take a giant leap of faith. Learning about himself from the inside out, he had realized he was created with unique gifts that made working as a transformational coach and leading the Noble Father community extremely fulfilling. In his God-given calling, Theo wakes up every morning with a fervor for life, passionately pursuing his deep-seated purpose and building a legacy he intends to leave behind for generations to come. Hey, Theo, thanks for being on the show today. I'm looking forward to speaking with you.
Yeah, glad to be on the show. Thank you.
Yeah, so we're talking about this idea, this topic of doing life together, men doing life together, and all the associated stuff that's going to come out of our conversation. So I'd love to start just at a high level. What does that mean to you when you think of that phrase, doing life together? What does that mean?
Yeah, it's as men, we're very easy to just lone wolf it, and I think society has it where, you can't really talk about your feelings and emotions, and it's something that I never had. I've always been very honest. People would come and have conversations, and I just opened myself up. It was just such a natural thing. But it comes easy to me, but for other people, it's more difficult. And I just very much think that we should hold more space for people to like share about their things.
Yeah. And what's so amazing about that is when guys think about I have to be a lone wolf, I can't share my emotions. And then we look through the Bible and we get not too far into the Bible and we get to David, and
Right.
David lived his emotions out. That dude shared everything. He
Yeah.
shared his high points. He shared his low points. So what do you think? What do you think are some of the things that get in the way of men doing that? We have examples from the beginning of history to current of men sharing their emotions, but it's so common. So what gets in the way of guys being willing to share?
Yeah, I really don't know where it all started, because there's probably a launch point for something like that, and culturally for me, even Asian parents and Asian upbringings, it's not very conducive to open sharing of these problems. There's a very outward way of living, and maybe that's something that came with the sinful nature, is that we just think that we could do it all ourselves, and we live this life so externally, and we just the image of something is kind of like this emphasis for us, and not a lot, or until you find Jesus, you don't realize that life is meant to be lived from the inside out.
Yeah. And share a little bit about that. When you say life is meant to be lived from the inside out, what do you mean with that?
Yeah, so identity is a big thing, and until I started to realize who God called me to be, my everything in my life was less than its maximum potential. uh, Living surface would be something outside affecting the inside, and that almost like creates a bit of a control dynamic where you're not maximizing what God ultimately called you to be. I liken it to like an IKEA furniture, right? If you're a furniture and you don't have the manual, like you don't go to a Toys R Us, or you don't go to like a what do you guys call it, Academy Sports, to find your who you are. You have to go back to the manufacturer. You have to go back to the creator to get what it is you were called to be, or who God sees you to be, and then maximize that potential. And maybe that's why, is that disconnect. We don't have that relationship, and so people who don't have that relationship don't know where to go to get their ultimate identity, and to live out that ultimate potential. So
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. And in there, when you mention, being who God called me to be, that's something that I think a lot of men struggle with. We have a tendency to feel like our calling needs to be big, world-changing calling, And sometimes that's not what it is. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's just calling at home. If a guy's talking with you and he says, "Okay, I hear you say be who God called me to be," but I have no idea who that is. And I'm in my 30s, I'm in my 40s, I've been married for a while, I've got kids, I go to work, but I have no idea what my calling is. How would you help somebody find that? How would you help them walk down that path of trying to figure out, well, what actually is my calling?
Yeah, so one of the things in my and before I started on this journey of running a community for fathers is through coaching, and really one of the things a guy actually that really walked me through my journey was this guy named Jamie Winship, and he really talks about identity a lot, about what is God calling us to be, and he has an exercise called an identity exchange where we're taking our false identities, everything that everybody else called us that God never said about us, and really giving that to God and saying, Lord, this is everything that others have called me that you never said about me, and taking that and giving it to God and visualizing what God does with this list or these words or these adjectives or description things that we call ourselves, and visualizing what God does with these identities, and then after that's been taken out and God has dealt with those things, to ask him, and being very quiet and still in that moment and asking God, what do you want? What do you call me? And just hearing the what comes back.
Yeah.
And so that's why Noble Father, the community is called Noble Father, and Noble is part of the name because God, after everything I had done, God called me Noble.
Yeah. Yeah, which is amazing, which is beautiful. I lead men's events here up in the mountains, and we spend a lot of time on the issue of identity because it is so core. If
Yeah.
we don't actually know who we are, everything else is in question.
Right.
And that's one reason the enemy attacks men's identity so strongly,
Yeah.
because if I can get you to question that, I can get you to question anything and everything. And so I
Right.
love that. So you mentioned the Noble Father. So you have a podcast there,
Yep.
and I know that recently, this year, I guess, you interviewed your dad. You interviewed your father. I'd love
Yeah.
to hear a little bit about that experience. What was it like interviewing your own father? What did you learn about you? What did you learn about him? Just share a bit about that.
Yeah, it almost like one of my friends like to put it, catching lightning in a bottle. And as you mentioned it, man, I just getting goosebumps because it was a very special moment. My dad didn't really have a good upbringing with his father, and so when I think about the father that I had, I'm very quite fortunate. And that experience was one in which, to be honest, we don't really have conversations like that, and it was just suddenly in that moment, just being able to open and have that conversation. It was almost as if there was a huge audience watching us, and not that we had to perform, but I felt like I finally had a conversation with my dad in a way that um, I've never had before. And really drawing out the information and the details, about your roots is something that we all are inherently wanting to do, and just we just never had the time to really sit down and talk like that. And he's always been very busy with ministry, and there are dynamics to that. His relationship, he was never hugged by his dad,
Mm.
and shown that affection, right? It's something so inherent to us here in the Western world, and yet he never had that. And so it was such a cathartic and spiritual experience as well, to get to share that with him. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's something that you learned that other you mentioned he's never was never hugged by his own dad, which would be quite formative. What was something else that you learned from him that maybe you had never heard before, or he just explained it in a different way or shared something differently? What was something that you learned?
Yeah, like just like understanding your lineage and how easily I could not have existed, and also seeing how God was moving in his life even before he even had a relationship with God, and that was a special thing to me, and one that gives me great encouragement because Noble Father isn't a Christian group. I have a lot of fathers who don't believe, but ultimately, like we both believe, is that the ultimate is through a relationship. You can't reach that potential without a relationship, and seeing that God was moving in my dad's life and in my grandparents' lives. There's so many twists and turns in the road that could have taken a detour where I would not have ever
Yeah.
existed.
Yeah.
And that's just such a humbling thing to know that God, who even if you don't have a relationship, is actively working to accomplish His will ultimately.
Yeah. Yeah, the number of things that have to happen for for you to exist, for me to exist, for us to have this conversation, it's mind blowing. It's mind
Right.
blowing.
Yeah.
And you mentioned there that your dad was busy with his ministry,
Yep.
and if I remember reading this right, I believe you grew up or spent a lot of your youth in Venezuela
Yes.
as a missionary.
Yes.
So that's a pretty tough place to grow up.
Yeah.
That's not the easiest place.
Right.
So what was that like for you as a kid? And then also, how do you think that experience impacted what you do today?
Oh, yeah. Well, great question. Yeah. So parents had me at a Bible college here in Alberta, in Canada. And, before I even knew what it meant to be Chinese or to be a Canadian, we were suddenly put into another foreign place, Venezuela. I was 3 years of age. We spent 7 years there. And as a pastor's kid, also, you kind of have, things to get used to. You're not really living, uh, I would say, not an ordinary life, right? And so, just yeah, you spoke English, but you also speak Cantonese in this place that speaks Spanish, and I felt really lost. Venezuela was this place that was a lot of rampant racism. In Spanish, you can't really say pig without saying Chinese, and so going down the street with my parents, and people would always be trying to do the slant eyes thing, and
Hmm.
making wisecracks at us, and it was really hard to understand why that was happening, and it was a lot of stuff for me to reconcile. One of those things, actually, we're talking about Batman is I really felt like an orphan. I really felt like nobody really understood the walk that I was in, right? And Bruce Wayne was a character in which he's just very lonely, and nobody really understood his walk. This kid who lost his parents, and I wouldn't say that I lost my parents, but I didn't really have that. I guess the support that I ultimately need or wanted. That really made it so that, like, I've really understood and reconciled that God made me very lost in my upbringing to now see the lost and want to include them in that. And that's really the most glaring thing, is that God turned something so broken within me, this lost journey, to now be able to recognize the lost and want to build a community around them.
Yeah. It's amazing how God does that. He'll take those difficult moments or dark moments or what we would consider broken and worst moments and use those. That
Right.
becomes our mission, that becomes our purpose to the
Yep.
point of calling earlier. Sometimes our calling is found in those really dark places. And so
Yeah.
it's always amazing to see how people work through that, how they walk through that and where they end up.
Yeah.
And so with your community, with the work that you're doing now with Noble Father, you had mentioned earlier how men are struggling with the lone wolf thing. How do you help guys sort of cross that line and say, hey, the lone wolf, it doesn't work. I know doesn't work. You know it doesn't work. We all know it doesn't work. You're still trying it. How do you help them kind of cross from that to saying, okay, yeah, I think I need to get involved in your community. I need to get involved in the kind of stuff that you do. How do you help them with that?
Yeah, so coming out of the pandemic, really, as I was going into being a coach, I really asked God, like, who do you want me to serve? And growing up, I really wanted to be a present father, and it was something right away. It was like, fathers, I want you to work with fathers. And so in that process, I joined a bunch of Facebook groups for dads, and just like seeing kind of the stuff that's in there, and writing out posts and content and what have you. And I just really felt this disconnect, right? Like, social media is meant to really
Yeah.
connect us, but there's just no connection, really, and how much is lost in translation from the text. And so seeing that this was the thing, I wanted a more face-to-face interaction. I have a lot of a deep social network, friends and family, church community as well. And even then, I felt as a father there was a bit of a lacking of community. And so why not? Zoom was this huge thing in pandemic, right? It just came out of it, you're not really out of nowhere, but just it really
Yeah.
skyrocketed in popularity. And so I was like, well, why don't we hold space for fathers in a face-to-face conversation and just go deep, right? Because the stuff that we talk about in the Facebook groups is just it doesn't lead anywhere. There's no real substance to it. And so, hey, why don't we all gather together? So very first time we had 9 guys come together, and I was just like, the very first prompt was like, what do you need to get off your heart? Like, what do you need to release? And it's amazing because the very first guy was he was just like, I've never told anybody this. And when you preface something with that, you
Yeah.
know something deep is coming, and just started to break and poured out his heart to us. And we haven't stopped meeting ever since that. It's been a weekly meetup, and the guys understand. They know that they want that stuff wants to come out, and they just don't have the space to do that, right? Most people's response would be, don't be a you don't just suck it up, right, princess? Like, don't show your emotion here. And that space really isn't that. It's contained. There's confidentiality to it, and we're all there to really just listen and just hold that space. And we expect that back too, right? It's not a really a two. It's not really just a one-way street of sharing your problems and then just leaving and coming back when things are not going well again. It's just holding that sacred space, and that's really how it's gone about doing it.
Nice. And
Yeah.
so did you started that during pandemic? So was that 2020 when you started that?
Yeah, so that was coming out of the pandemic. That was the March 31st of 2022 was our very first
Okay.
meeting. Yeah.
Excellent. Very
Yeah.
cool. Very cool. And so you mentioned that prompt. What do you need to get off your heart? Um, and that ties back into one of our earlier points here about men and not sharing emotions. When guys realize they're in a space where they can actually do that, they can actually share. They don't have to worry about it coming back at them. It's such a powerful thing. But so many men have been burned by that. That's one of the reasons they don't. They'll say, I remember when I was 19 and I shared something and it really came back to haunt me. Or I was in my mid 20s and I shared something and they've never let me forget ever since. And so I'm just not going to share anything ever again. Do you get guys in your group who want to be there, but they're still not willing to share anything? And with those guys, how have you been able to help them sort of walk a little bit down that? Because you're certainly not going to drop somebody in the deep end and force them, and say, hey, welcome, you've been here a minute, tell us the most deepest, darkest, that
Yeah.
doesn't work.
Right.
But the guys who are, they know they need this. They're just not quite there yet. So they're showing up, they're with you, they're not really engaging though. They're not really talking. What have you found to be effective, or how do you help those guys?
Yeah, it's definitely not a space of forcing somebody to share.
Right.
And one of the ways we've found that really helps is giving some fun prompts or even engaging prompts or deep prompts to start sharing about stuff. So, for example, a fun prompt we did this past week was, if you had $50,000, no responsibilities, no work, and you have a month off to go do whatever you want, what would it be? What would you go do? And that kind of kickstarts a conversation. But then we also have deeper ones where actually it's interesting because the previous week of that was, who's an important person you've lost in your life and what was their
Mhm.
impact on you? And really, it's something that's very personal, deeply personal, and some choose not to answer, which is okay because it's a come as you are space.
Yeah.
However you're feeling, just come. If you don't want to share, there's no forcing, there's no coercion to share. If you don't feel like sharing, you don't have to. If you don't want to answer the prompt, you don't have to. It's a regular thing. It's actually very difficult. Some guys come out, they have a great experience, and for whatever reason, just never come back. And you hear them say they want it, and some don't even show up. So
Right.
it's
Right.
it's a really tricky thing with men.
Yeah.
I just trust that God is bringing the right people, and whoever needs the space will end up staying. And if they choose not to stay, like I've learned to just let that wash right off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's something I have found as well is men, even guys who will say that this is what they want, they may say it, but until you actually commit, till you actually show up and do it, it's sort of people who say they're interested in something. Being
Right.
interested in something is not that meaningful.
Right. Right.
what are you committed to? What are you actually doing? What's your behavior? What are your actions?
Yeah.
That's much more meaningful. But just being interested in something, that's not likely to ever have any change. You're not likely to have any impact if you're just interested.
Right.
You mentioned these prompts. Are you the one who creates the prompts all the time, or does the community create the prompts, or where do those come from?
Yeah, mostly comes from me, and periodically I'll have a dad come and he'll say, "Hey, I have something I think would be a great prompt." It's amazing, through the week I'll get things in the most random of places, and it's just like, is God just dropping something on my lap and saying, hey, this would be a great topic to talk around. And also, I kind of, as a facilitator of the space, I really see how the dynamic of the space has gone the last few weeks. Followed up, the really, really deep prompt. A lot of the guys broke down talking about people that were important to them that they've lost. It was a really, really heavy one. It was probably the
Yeah.
heaviest we've ever had. And so we, followed up with a fun one so that it's not always so down and dreary, I guess. Some were celebrating people, others were, really disappointed they lost them to cancer or what have you. So yeah, mostly I come up with those prompts, usually from things that are happening in my life as well, that God has walked me through. And just, yeah, what is this a good prompt? Why not just, yeah, share and talk about it?
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So coming back to the big idea here of doing life together, one of the things that I've run into is I'll talk with a man and he'll say, I don't really need other guys in my life because I have my wife. And
Yeah.
and she's my best friend, and she would say I'm her best friend, and that's great. So we have each other. So I
Yeah.
don't need other men. How do you respond to that? How do you respond to somebody who says, "Well, I have my wife, but so I don't need other guys." What's your response to something like that?
Yeah, part of that confidentiality is, yeah, there is that, I have a wife as well, and we will talk about things, but it's not in a way that's like demeaning or anything. I think for those guys that say something like that, I like to tell them, like, there's certain things that don't need to be said that a man would understand that you would have to say verbally to your wife. And that's just how it is. It could be the same as, oh, you went to a concert with a friend and your wife was not there in attendance. Doesn't matter how many words you use to describe the experience to her, she's not going to fully understand that. And I think as a man as well, is that she's a woman. There are things in our makeup that she would not fully understand. And why are we so fascinated with skipping rocks, or why are we so fascinated with little things like superheroes and stuff? Like, why are you so interested in romantic comedies or whatever it is that your wife is into? There's inherent differences that we resonate with our fellow man. That's just how it is. And iron sharpens iron, right? There's a reason we do life with men. And maybe that's also human psychology of coming up with excuses to not open up about these things. I'm not saying that you can't fully open up to your wife, but even I know is that there are some things that my guys understand. Some of these I've never met. I can just say a thing a certain way and they would instantly get it.
Yeah.
Whereas probably have to explain it. And so, if that's their position, like, I don't feel like I'm there to like really change their mind. I hope that someday they'll figure it out, and then they'll reciprocate that back, and be like, yeah, I think you were right. But it's not a space for me to like change somebody's opinion, or however they want to live their life. But for those that get it, they totally understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that in that there are times where we could say things to another guy and we just get it. We don't need other stuff to it.
Right.
Something that I always point out to my wife if we're watching a movie. We're movie fans in our family, so we
Yeah.
watch a lot of movies. Is you might have two men who have some sort of conflict. They don't like each other for the moment. They've been friends, but at
Yeah.
the moment they don't like each other. And then, something happens and they have to work together for a minute. They don't talk, but they have to
Right.
work. You already know where I'm going. They have to
Yeah.
work together for a minute. They don't talk about anything. One of them looks at the other one, gives them the nod. The other one looks and gives them the nod, and they're done.
Right.
I've pointed that out to my wife. I'm like, oh, that was it, by the way. Their conflict is over.
Right.
you know,
And
they
you don't get it. That's why.
and yeah, and so that's just a great example of how we see and view things differently. And so
Yeah.
having somebody, so a man to walk the walk with you and have your back and know he's going to have your back without judgment. And he just wants to see the best for you with
Right.
no expectation of return. That's one of those things that is so powerful, but sometimes until you experience it, you don't know what you're missing. You you
Right.
don't you don't actually know what that's like.
Well,
So
and we don't understand the context too, because like you said, like, they've been let down before. And
yeah,
so, like, maybe they've been let down so much that it's just like, no, I'm going to latch onto the next person who kind of understands me. But then they've never experienced what true community or true brotherhood really is. And then, of course, they'd come to that conclusion. We'd never understand that context. I don't think we'd ever fully understand that context.
yeah. Yeah, and to the understanding point, I think one of the lies of the enemy, in addition to you're fine being a lone wolf, is nobody will understand.
Mhm.
The number of guys I've talked to who've said nobody else is in my position, nobody else has gone through what I'm going through, nobody else will understand is huge.
Yeah.
And ironically, all of their stories are pretty similar. The
Yes.
ones who
Right.
say nobody will understand have some
Right.
similar stories. So what are your thoughts on that? You know, a man saying, I don't want to do community because nobody's going to understand what I'm going through. Nobody's going to be able to relate to my problem.
Yeah, we all like to think that we're the exception of the rule. Like we're the main character and everybody else is kind of this NPC, right? A
Yeah.
non-playable character, and that is just not true. One of the themes that you'll find in those meetups whenever we get together is like people will say like I I I didn't realize that I wasn't the only one going through this,
Yeah.
or they'll say something like, "Wow, I didn't realize that somebody could get into a worse position than I'm presently in," and that's very much like the Batman talk, right? Of man, there are others out there who are just like him, right? He sees, in the movie, this kid who lost his father, and suddenly he resonates with this kid that nothing needs to be said and they understand one another, right? The look in their eyes, the emptiness and the darkness within, he recognizes right away. And that's also that's a point of solace. That's what community is all about, to know that another fellow man is going through what I'm going through. The journey may not look the same, but there is hope.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, there's always hope. There's always
Yeah.
hope. And
Yeah.
um so we'll say a guy comes to you and he wants to be in the community and he attends from time to time, but he's also looking to build sort of the in real life friendships, the even scarier friendships,
Yeah.
the ones where we're actually face to face, actually shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah.
Um, how do you recommend guys go about doing that? Because I've talked with guys there and they're like, yeah, I enjoy your groups, I enjoy coming to your events, but what about back home? What about
Mm.
somebody, who I can call and talk with in my community, in my neighborhood? I find sometimes men are even more resistant to that.
Yeah.
It's sort of a flip because we're so used to the online world that now
Yeah.
the real world and
Right.
building the friendships there seems even more challenging. So how does a man go about building a friendship in the real world?
Yeah, like it is a difficult find, right? I mean, it is a pretty rare thing for men to hold space for one another. I don't necessarily have the recipe to that. I really feel like in order to want to have deep level friendships, you have to open up your heart, even if it means risking getting hurt.
Yeah.
And being vulnerable with people that you don't know is necessarily safe. Honestly, to the point where I really don't care anymore. I just open myself to anybody. There's nothing they could do with my information that would hurt me. There's no way they could weaponize it against me. And if they did, like, I wouldn't even give them that control. And so, obviously, it's easier for me to say that. But for others who are looking for that kind of friendship, I guess even just recognizing that and being open that way, maybe would lead to an opportunity where, oh, this person's actually willing to share back with me, and that'll recognize as a good friend to keep, or somebody to not waste any more time with. Locally, yeah, I do feel like my big recommendation, even for those that don't believe what we believe, is to go find a church community, right?
Yeah.
Is to really find one that, and I ask them, is like, if you don't know what to look for, or things that feel fishy to you, hey, like, come talk. Let's have a conversation about that. How to find that leadership, how to find those men who genuinely care about your well-being and want you to have a relationship, but not necessarily coerce you or force you into believing what they believe. There are people like that out there, and I think even just giving them that hope is a lot. And I've encountered this too. I've had people that I've sat on a plane with that I'd never met in real life, and just holding that space and going deep in myself, like, almost opens them up to open up and go deep with their things, and and that gives me kind of this hope that there are people like this out there. Potentially, everybody's able to do this.
Yeah.
If the right space is there, they probably open up about their things.
Yeah. I think people are drawn to truth.
Yeah.
People are drawn to honesty. People are drawn to reality. because so much of our life is so artificial. I mean, AI, right? The rise of
Yeah.
AI, we're living in that right now. So
Yeah.
so much of our world is artificial that when you get around a guy, a person, but in our context, we're talking with men. When you get around a man who's willing to be just open and honest and true, it's so refreshing. And
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons, in my opinion, that people were so drawn to Jesus, is he always was truth.
Yeah.
And not only is he the truth, but he always spoke truth,
Right.
even if people didn't want to hear it.
Absolutely.
But they're drawn to that, and
Yeah.
and men love that. And you mentioned it not being weaponized against you. That's something that a lot of people are afraid of. They're worried, well, if I share this, how are you going to use this information?
Yeah.
But one of the benefits, in my view, one of the benefits of being a Christian and knowing what Jesus did, knowing why he came to earth, knowing salvation, knowing his sacrifice on the cross, and knowing that outcome makes it a lot easier for me to not really care how a person here on earth might want to weaponize my information.
Right.
Because, yeah, they might say something mean, they might mock, they might be insulting, they might whatever.
Right.
I still know where I'm headed.
Hmm.
I still know where we're going in the end.
Right.
So how does your faith play into that part of the conversation? How does your faith play into your own belief system on something like that, on not allowing this other person to weaponize stuff against you?
Well, we're full circle again because this is identity, right? External influence, something that's internally. If I'm secure in the inside, it doesn't really matter what you say or do to me. I know that the only person, the only authority that I should go to for what is being said about me is my God and my Father. And so that frees you up, really. Like it doesn't matter if that's what you believe about me. Okay, fine, that's okay. Like it's not
Right.
it doesn't make it any true. There's no truth to it what you've just said. And so and that liberates us to really go to these really dark places and to these very difficult places and to very hurt people and really just embrace them and show them the love the way we've been shown, right, and experienced, to bring them back into the fold. And that's a very that's a very bright light in a very, very dark place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and something that just came to mind about that, the light in the dark place is I've talked with a lot of men who do prison ministry, and so they talk about this man in prison being that light, and that is a pretty dark place. But they
Yeah.
also talk about the aspect of feeling free. So you have a
Mhm.
man in prison who feels free, not free in our sense that you and I are. We're out in the world. If we want
Right.
to go drive to a restaurant, we can just go if we want,
Right.
because we're quote unquote free. But these are men who are in prison and are living that life of free.
Right.
And it's amazing how, like you said, to go full circle, how identity impacts everything. It
Yeah.
impacts all of who we are. It impacts how we are as fathers, as husbands, as leaders, as friends.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just a I have myself stuck. I don't even know where to go with that. It's just so
Yeah.
so moving and so powerful that I wish everybody in the world could experience that and could understand that.
Yeah.
That's what Paul talks about when he writes about being free, even while he's in prison. Is
Yeah.
that? Yeah.
Yeah. And you talked about, the devil and what, how he would work. Like the scariest thing is like it took me so long to find a church that understood that piece of identity. Why is that not more talked about more in church, right? And obviously we know not all churches are the same. And if it's not an emphasis, like schools should be teaching how to do taxes or other things that are important, life lessons. A lot of churches out there don't really emphasize that identity thing, and immediately that's a huge disconnect that instantly takes us away from our maximized potential. And that's obviously another conversation, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So I want to switch gears a little bit.
Yep.
Still on the topic, but a different aspect of this. One of the things that I think is hurting men and friendships and community and doing life together is social media, which is this weird double-edged sword. Because, for example, it allows you and I to connect. It allowed us to meet one another
Yep.
and chat and then set up this time to talk. And so there are these great aspects of social media, but at the same time, it's created this false friendship sort of dynamic.
Yeah.
I have 5,000 friends according to my social media.
Right.
So how do you think social media is impacting men and impacting friendships and doing life together? Honestly, doing life together.
Yeah, it's really scapegoat goated like intentionalness of relationships. It's easy. It's like saying you have a gym pass, but you don't actually go to the gym.
Yeah.
And it's maybe worse for us as men because we're so easy to go it our own way, and it's easy to present kind of this facade. It's almost Asian in that sense, right? You're kind of this outward facade of who I am, and you're almost it's almost creating a fortress and a wall for you to discourage other people to actually breach and
Mm,
talk deeply about things. And even just the nature of using text is like not even 10% of communication, I believe, right? It's the tone is lost and everything. And yeah, I definitely do agree with that. Those groups, those Facebook dad groups that have like 100, 200, 300,000 dads in them, like that's just it's just not not intentional enough. And maybe that's the devil's way of also like keeping us in our own issues and not
mm,
actually talking about what truly matters. And I guess that does tie back into the identity piece of, if we are living so externally, a place like social media that's so external is such a welcoming place for people. But that's not to say everybody in these groups are this way. For those that live from the inside out or want to live from the inside out, want to go deeper than just the surface, there are communities like Significant Man Ministries or Noble Father.
hmm Yeah. Yeah, that reminds me of of an old joke that I like. It's a comic, a little comic strip. I guess it's not old. It's newer, but it's a couple people sitting in a funeral, and there's a man in the casket, and it's open, and there's a little drawing of his picture, and one woman leads over to the other, says, "I thought there'd be more people here. He has 5,000 friends." And you know there's nobody there other than a couple people, because that's
Yeah,
when we get rid of that veneer of social media,
right,
we don't actually know these people.
right.
And it's yeah, so it's weird. You mentioned there live inside out.
Yep.
I'd love you to expand on that as a phrase. What does that phrase mean to you?
Yeah. So if I had to, put it to, and I'll expand the term, or maybe actually broaden or specify the term transactional and transformational. Transactional would be, I give you this, you give me that. That's a very surface level exchange. I could liken that to a bit of a business, right? Transaction. Transformational would be something that really hits you in the core, right? Right to the depth. And from that depth, amazing things happen. It comes out outwardly. So that the directional will be external to internal for transactional, and transformational will be really from the inside out. So like identity. So noble, for example, right, with the definition of noble is showing high moral principles and values. So living from that place from the inside out, that is that is who I am. That's who I am. And one of the things that they say about addictions is, if somebody asks you, or if you wanted a cigarette, right? Saying that I don't smoke anymore, as opposed to I am not a smoker, is two very different answers.
Mm,
If you are somebody who's recovering, you could say I'm not a smoker, and that would exponentially increase the odds that you wouldn't go back into doing it. And so living inside out is really that premise of changing that dynamic. Because let's just say with noble, what's the opposite of noble? Well, evil or sinister. Um, that's a very different identity, right? If I answer questions from the identity of I'm a criminal or I'm somebody who's sinister, the answers are very polarizing uh, ends, right? And so, inside out living is it. I'm not a criminal. God doesn't call me that, and so there's no way that'll be inside out. But if we allow that external thing or that identity piece to go in there, somebody said that we'd be a good doctor, and suddenly I think that I'm a good doctor when the source never called us that.
mm,
The results of our life, the fruits of our life is very different from getting it from source.
Yeah. 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 And I like the distinction there between transaction and transformed. One of my personal favorite Bible verses, and I don't have a life verse because I go through them so many so fast.
Right.
But Romans 12:2 is a big one for me, and that's where Paul's talking about being transformed by renewing your mind and
Yeah.
changing the way that you think and doing God's will and that whole transformation idea. We're supposed to be different men.
Right.
We're not supposed to be the same men that the world's trying to make us into being. God wants us to be different.
Yeah.
He wants us to be in his image. He wants us to be following what Jesus said and what Jesus taught. And that
Right.
requires transformation.
Yep.
If we're
Right.
just like the rest of the world, then what's the point? What if
Yeah.
if there's no difference in me in the way I speak or the way I act with people or the media I consume,
Yeah.
um, I have not been transformed. I have
Right.
not had that change inside out happen.
Right.
So I do like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why the voice recognizing a relationship is important, because if we don't recognize the voice, we can follow the wrong thing. There's so many voices, there's so many distractions, so many gurus, so many reels and authorities that could really mislead us. And Revelation tells us is that there will be a time where one will come to deceive and many will fall. And so, man, now's the time. Have that relationship. Learn what the shepherd's voice sounds like so that we could follow the right voice. Don't do that, and who knows what'll happen.
Yeah. Well, we do know. Well,
Yeah, I
we
mean,
don't we
yeah,
don't want
we
to scare guys, so to
right,
speak, but we do know
right. We
actually.
do know.
And it's not what we should be aiming for. Yeah.
Yeah, right, right.
Yeah.
Nobody looked forward to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, one other question that I wanted to make sure to get your input on, your thoughts on leading a community. There's a big push on this idea of accountability, especially when it comes to men doing life together.
Yeah,
And we'll often say, well, hey, one of the benefits is accountability. One of the things that you get out of this is accountability. For a lot of men, though, that's kind of a scary word. That's
yeah,
that's kind of a dangerous word. Like, well, I don't mind telling you what I'm working on, but holding me accountable, I'll take care of that myself.
yeah.
It's sort of like I'm half in. I'm going to tell you this, but I'm going to be the lone wolfing it on my accountability side.
Mm,
So, what are your thoughts on accountability between men in terms of just life, doing life together,
yeah.
whatever particular goal or whatever thing they're working on? What are your thoughts on accountability in that relationship?
Yeah, that's in opening up to somebody, being vulnerable with your heart with them is that you're suddenly vested in the person, and you ultimately want to see them get better, not just stagnate or even just coast, or stay afloat in the places that they're at. Accountability is something that comes up very often in our community because, like you said earlier, it's not about the words that we say, it's about the actions we take as a result of the words. Better yet, don't say the words and just let your results show the actions you've taken. And that's something that, if you stay long enough in a community, right, and an inherent accountability measures are there, is that it's very hard for you to fake results. I have guys who have been with us for a long time, and it seems like they haven't, nothing's really changed. And why is that? And a direct correlation really is to the accountability. One of the things we've done as a community also is just like going through our yearly goals together, and just meeting together and just talking about, hey, how has my circumstances changed? What was the difficulties this month? What were the lessons that I learned, and what to look forward to in the next month? And as we go through the journey that way, it's very hard to be like, oh, my garage is still unclean. I said I was going to clean it. It's almost like fire under your butt to go and
Mm,
get that
yeah.
resolved and fixed. And whenever you lean into accountability, there's no way the results of your life don't change. It's just impossible. It's crazy because our meetups, we've been meeting so consistently, some of the guys just show up for that and their lives are something is going on. Like God is moving in their lives, and things happen, and things are changing, and dynamics are changing, and it's almost like God is drawing these people in, and so yeah, accountability is something that you can't for a community of depth, you can't not have accountability, or else it would just end up being like dads helping dads, where a community on Facebook where people just say that they want to improve, but then later on I see them post the same thing, or they
Yeah.
got with another woman who's exactly the same as the previous partner, right? The dangers of that is you'll see you change nothing, nothing changes, and that's what we know as insanity.
And do you have any formal accountability set up? Where you kind of match a couple guys together once they know each other and you know that they have similar interests or whatever, or how do you work that for you for your guys?
Yeah, so our membership community is called the Fortress, and so guys who are invested into their own development will sign up, and it's really open to all Fortress members. Not everybody takes part, but what we do for those who do want to have that accountability is this year we've done it different, where I created this form that kind of just like prompts to ask oneself about the seven domains of wellness of what you want to of areas that you want to work on, right? So you got the physical, the emotional, the mental, the spiritual, the social, the vocational, and the environmental. And so, really, just asking questions about all seven of those domains, drawing out what they want to get accomplished for the end of the year. We know that the goals will change. Also, making it personal. If you don't want me to message you about it, that's okay. If you want me to give you a phone call once every month or once every week, I could do that. We do have a once a month call that we do at the end of every month to just talk about the things that we're learning and the things that we're growing in, and how things may have changed, and what kind of support do we need to grow through that. And that's really it's really been just kind of this evolving idea of how do we do it. Last year, we just kind of informally talked about our goals here and there on some of the meetups. And now we're just, okay, we've set a time every month. Everybody who's interested in doing this has filled out the form. These are their goals. You can go review them on this document. And what do we need to hold each other to? Oh, this person doesn't want to do it anymore. That's okay. Make it personal. That's really how we've
Mhm.
gone about it. Really trying to lower the barrier of that, because yeah, like you said, it's a really daunting thing to talk about accountability, and really just want to just lower it on all the prompts you'll see. Make your own. If there's something if you don't like these prompts, fine, make it your own. Tell us what you want to work on, and tell us how you want us to hold you accountable.
Yeah. Yeah, and the key there, as I'm hearing you, the key there is intentionality. The guy has to just intentionally do this. And
Right.
and that's something I talk about with guys as well. You can't accidentally get
Right.
transformed into the man that God wants you to be.
Yeah.
You have your part to play. It's like if you
Right.
pray to God for a hole, don't be surprised when he gives you a shovel. Like
Right.
you've got to do your part. You've got to be intentional. And
Yeah.
and and so, guys intentionally signing up, guys intentionally doing that work, guys intentionally seeking out accountability, that's how life changes.
Right.
That's how you can look back and say, okay, 5 years ago, I was a different guy.
Yeah.
It's not just, okay, I got a 10% raise in my salary over the last 10 years or something. You're like, I was a different man.
Right.
I'm different today. God
Right.
has moved in me in all of those seven areas or whichever one, somebody's
Yeah.
particularly working on. So
Yeah.
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, we
Um,
have guys that just like have come through such a long way, and it's like it's very glaringly obvious. I guess you can harken back to the verse, right? Good tree bears good fruit. Bad tree bears bad fruit. There's no way you can't say that this person has changed and the results of their life is different. And then you look at, how did you commit? Well, if you didn't, maybe it's time to lean in, right? Don't get left
yeah.
behind.
Yeah. Yeah. So for guys who are thinking, why is my life this year the same as last year? You didn't change anything. You
Right.
didn't commit to anything. You weren't intentional about making any changes. You didn't do anything different. And
Yeah.
if that's you, if you're listening and you feel like the last 3 or 4 or 5 years have just been the same, you're gonna have to do something different.
Right.
And there is a little bit of risk there. That's true. There is a little bit of stepping out. That's true. But that's how your life is going to change. You've
Hmm.
got to be willing to do those things if you want to have a different outcome. Like that's just math. Like we're
Right.
just doing
Yeah.
math at that particular
Right.
point. If you want a different output, you're going to need a different input there.
Right.
So what I love to make sure we have time always at the end of the hour is just a very open-ended question for you on something that we may have missed about this idea of guys doing life together, or something you wanted to go back to that we didn't get a chance to go back to. So it's just very, very open-ended for you. What's something that we may have missed, a final point, just something that you'd like to leave guys with on this?
Yeah, and this is something that we have a mutual touch point on, is doing it in person, right? Needing to meet in person, doing retreats, and this is something you do as well, and I do as well, and it might look different, but we don't when we do our meetups, we lead with intention. Is that we're not here just to meet online every week and that's it. The goal really is to go deeper and hey, if there's somebody that's local to you that you can drive to go meet up with, go and do that. We will have annual retreats where you get to meet up. Hey, it's not a money making endeavor for us yet. Um, Come commit your resources to come and do that. There's great value in meeting these people face to face, and I'm sure you have that as well. Of the guys that come together and you just form this bond. It's you guys attended a concert together, and you guys just understand each other. Jokes that you guys shared with one another. It just comes out, and really that's what God intended. Where two to three gather together, that's where He is with them. And though some of the members in my community are not believers, it's amazing that God still meets us where we're at. And yeah, maybe that's the thing is like if you're looking for a community and it's not either of our communities, that's fine. Go find a community that has people who prioritize meeting face to face and not just settling for the Zooms or the Discords out there. They want to go intentional. Always strive for that because if it's just going to stay online, it's going to stay surface, and that's more transactional than it is transformational.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And ultimately that transformation is what we're after. We want to see how God is using these men. How is
Yeah.
he changing their lives, their families, their kids, their grandkids, their great grandkids, the
Yes.
generations they'll never meet. How
Absolutely.
it's amazing to watch that happen.
Yeah.
If men want to get connected with you, if they want to find you, reach you, where do they go? How do they find you?
Yeah, so they can find me with my unique name. There's nobody else on Facebook with it. Or else, if you want to find me on Instagram, it's at Coach Theo Z, and that's where you can get in contact with me. You can also Google Noble Father, and all the results would literally be the stuff that we put out.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Theo, really appreciated your time today, your insight on this. It was a great conversation. Have a great rest of your day.
Yes. Thank you.